a story, yes, there's a storyteller, but there's also the listeners and the reactions, right? And so
Yes.
like my favorite storytellers happen to be comedians. And
Right.
so like they are on a stage and they're telling a story. How do they know the story's going well? Well, they're getting laughter, right? And if they're getting nothing, they know it's bombing, right? So it's the same thing in a classroom or a teaching environment. You have to be sensitive to the reception. You can do a lot of things to build a good reception for yourself, right,
Hmm.
as a
Hmm.
storyteller. So that story of I'm a teacher with a purpose, you're a student with a purpose. How can we come together to meet that purpose?
Welcome to the Storycraft podcast for storytellers. I'm your host, Meg Adams, and I'm here to help you explore how stories shape our connections. Wondering how stories help you network and advance? Looking to bridge online and face-to-face worlds, foster understanding, and ignite innovation? Look no further. Whether you're a leader, communicator, educator, or just love a good story, join us for actionable insights and real talk with professional storytellers, all aimed at helping you build stronger, better connections.
Today we are joined with Dr. Elkie Burnside. Elkie is a former professor of writing and rhetoric. She's also an independent scholar, still studies and researches and writes in that area. And she's also an instructional designer. So we have lots to talk about her. I'm so grateful that she is with us to talk about all those things, all those wonderful things that she does. But Dr. Elkie, could you start with letting us know sort of your background career path? How did you get into, where was your interest in writing? Yes, let
Yeah.
us know how you ended up where you are.
Well, thank you so much for having me, of course. And you can call me Elkie. You don't have to call me
Okay.
Dr. Elkie. That's fine. To go all the way back, I really got interested in my specialty, which is multimodal composing, digital composing, which means in non-academic speak, that means I think that thinking about how we communicate with sound and color and space and words in a combination, right? So all of these things, it's not always gestures, right? All these things. That's what multimodal composing is a consideration of all those aspects. And
Mhm.
so what really got me into that was in high school. I was in part of the yearbook staff and took some journalism and actually did some photojournalism as well, and really just started thinking about an intentionality to the things that we see before us. And so that really started the digital part of my interests. We actually, way back then, did still use physical layout, and we had
Oh,
pica
nice.
sticks and the blue sheets and all that for like the first semester and the first year, and then we switched completely to digital. That was when I had my first heartbreak of working on a 30+ page spread and then having the digital backup die on you and so like really I learned early on multiple backups, multiple savings,
Yes.
those
Yes.
kinds of things. So that really got me into that digital aspect. The rhetorical part and my undergrad was in biblical studies and Christian ministry,
Mhm.
and I was on the mission field for a year in Thailand, and then came home for personal reasons. And then when I was home, I started thinking, what is it that I'm going to keep doing? And I got into a master's of literature program and really engaged with the literary part of that, and looked at a metaphysical poet named John Donne, and
Oh,
did some research on. He often is thought of, I think, a lot of scholars will point to an author. Shakespeare's a common one. That clearly isn't one person. There's no way one person could have that output. John Donne is a similar um, way, because much of his early poetry is very secular and very about sex and all this, like, put it in, and all the hidden messages of that.
huh.
And then his later poetry is about God and Christ and that kind of stuff. And their argument is, well, clearly that's two different people. And my response, as I was, fledgling scholarliness, my response was, actually, that's one person. That's how we are
Mhm.
one. That's how we are people, is we have
Yeah.
both aspects, and we find a community in making space for ourselves. And I think now I look back and I think, oh, I was making space for my own personal self, right? And
Yes.
so, kind
Yeah.
of going through that, and I have worked at different careers and different jobs between all of my degrees, to support myself, sometimes to support my family, to help augment that. And so I came to my PhD program after teaching 10th grade English in a rural school in the Midwest and 8th grade English in a urban gangbanger school in the Midwest.
Mhm.
And having my doctor say, if you don't do something less intense, you're going to have a heart attack and die.
Mhm.
And so my less intense was to go back and get my PhD, which people laugh. And I'm like, but it was less intense than teaching,
Yeah.
30 plus 8th graders for an hour and 50 minutes, 4 times a day, so
Mhm.
it was. And I wanted to take all those kids home with me and say that it would be all right. And just the empathy I had for them and thinking about the similarities in some of our background, not all, but some of, so that's been a core element. I think the empathy of me thinking about who I'm with and the community I'm building has been the core through all that. So did my PhD and completely walked into a different part, Bible to literature to rhetoric and writing,
Mhm.
and doing a lot of technical writing and science writing and professional writing along the way. And my PhD program is where I really dug back into the multimodal digital aspects, became really interested in that work, and started, I joined Kairos, which is a journal, a multimodal academic journal. We don't do any solely print pieces. So a lot of people will send us a Word document and say, here, this is great, you should publish it. We're not making PDFs of a print journal. We're actually creating that interaction, right? So that sound, that color, that gesture, that space. And so I've been working with them for a long time, and it's been a lot of great learning for me there. And so I've been teaching and training for 20 years now. And my most recent turn was to step away from higher ed and academia and think about how I can take my expertise in online teaching and training. I trained firefighters, emergency services providers, thought about creating electronic digital products that work in the active work zone as well as in an academic background place, just a lot of different outputs of what I've been doing. And so my thought process of coming to be an instructional designer is that it's kind of a accumulation of all the things I've done. It's still very teaching oriented and service oriented. I think that's been a common thing through everything I've done, and just thought about um, how does this, what may seem like a random um, kind of trail for myself, making space for others, coming out later in life as I was at a tenure track, somewhat conservative school, and making that discovery for myself, and identifying as a queer scholar, feminist scholar, like all of these things that I think early on me would be like, oh my gosh, those are so weird thing, like things I can't identify with. And it's so much fun to look back and reflect and go like, man, I've grown so much. But actually, I have some friends that have known me a long time. They're like, but the core of you has never changed. You love people, you love your community, and you love serving. And even though you do it in these different ways. And so I think like if I do get critiqued, which is the polite way of saying criticized, for not having a cohesive research agenda. But I think that's a little bit of where I'm stepping away from a space that expects me to have cohesion in in a very specific traceable way. My cohesion is that it feels right to me and it feels true to me, the things that I'm doing at the right time in the right space. So that's the big overview. I don't know if there's any thread you want to pick out, or
No,
if
oh, so many threads.
holds.
So many threads. The first one though, I love, you said a couple of things, but I heard the thread of, you have been teaching for 2 decades now. How do you create a sense of belonging and community? And we could talk about this 2 ways. I'm interested in your thoughts, having taught in person, for so many years across like those age groups. And then now, later in your career, really doing that primarily digitally, like you talked about multimodal composition. So I'd be curious to see how you create a sense of belonging in both spaces,
Mm,
what your tips are.
yeah. I think when I got my formal training as a teacher, I was going through alternative licensure program focused on teaching at secondary ed, the middle school, high school level. And in a large sense, a lot of what's happening there is classroom management. It's not a
Mm,
lot of education. And so for me, I was trying to find a way to blend, knowing that I would be facing 28 to 35, sometimes 40 students in a classroom at
mhm.
one time, with a very low level of desire to be there. And so if you start with that, the story that you tell from there or the methods that you use in that kind of environment is very intentional. Kids know, and I feel free to edit this out. Kids know if you're trying to BS them, right? Like they
Oh yeah.
know if you don't care about them, they don't care about you, right? And there was that empathy part, and part of why I was giving so much was because I was caring about them and really wanting them to have a chance. And I think so the tips of what you do in a face-to-face classroom, I don't think are any different than what you do in a digital space, because for me, any good learning space is clear expectation, right? So maybe it's different how you get to set that expectation, right? So maybe I'm in a face-to-face physical classroom, whether it's through Zoom and I have that face-to-face time, or I'm physically located together in one space. My expectation can be, this should take you 2 minutes and you should have, a 5 to 8 sentence output. Make sure you consult with one other person, right? And I get to say that into the classroom space. Well, in a digital space, you can project that in a PowerPoint, or you can make sure you include it in the instructions. I know that for myself, when I started teaching more intensively online, I thought, oh, this is so much information. It's so much to show them and share with them. And you have to acknowledge, yes, it is.
Mhm.
So then, whereas you're in a classroom and a physical classroom, and you can monitor who is actually working and who
Mhm.
is actually
Mhm.
getting it, the thing that you have to do in a digital space is make those clear expectations and then have a way of following up. So if you're having a synchronous class where you've made that expectations, and I've also taught hybrid where half my class is physically with me and half my class is online, which is a whole nother
Yeah.
level of
Yes.
planning, right? So to me, it's that clear expectation and that clear explication of it. I think
Mhm.
whether you're saying it out loud and then monitoring by watching, or saying it out loud and putting it in print and then doing some follow up, right? So if you're hybrid, you can walk around the classroom and or type into the breakout rooms that we're also used to. How's
Mhm.
it going? Often when I work, especially in hybrid classes, the students will tell me, I like this chat version. Is it in our LMS, or do you like the Zoom chat version better? Which way, is it
Mm.
direct email to me? Like making some of those classroom norms also that we take for granted in a physical co-located space that aren't created. So the first is that clear expectation and intention, which takes a lot more planning initially in online
Mhm.
spaces. But then, and this kind of goes to another piece of what I think about is that you're building teaching over time, right? So you're going to get better at teaching online. You're going to get better at teaching, period, over time. And
Love
so,
that.
you know, like your first year of teaching is always and then your first year of teaching a new class is always like it's okay.
Yeah.
I've mentored a lot of graduate teaching assistants. I've been a graduate teaching assistant. I know you have as well. And just thinking about the messages that were like, you got this, we can do it, we're here to do it together. So I think so
Mhm.
planning, clear expectation, that communication, and then giving yourself as much grace as you give your students. I think that's the other piece that's made teaching in whatever modality interesting for me, is that I'm learning as much as they are. I think especially when the very early parts of talking about multimodal composing. And I was very privileged to get to speak to and work with Cindy Self and Cheryl Ball and Doug Iman and tangentially some other great people. Cindy, one of the best things she ever said in a workshop that I was in was, I never tell a student it's simple, but I do tell a student that we'll accomplish it together. And like, that's just something that like really spoke to me, to say, I'm never going to tell a student, why aren't you getting this? It's simple, right? Because I think often the best teachers are not the smartest, if that makes a sense, right? Like if
Absolutely. Yeah.
you're so smart, you can't even comprehend about why someone might not get it.
Mhm.
um, that makes it difficult for someone to come alongside and work with you. You have to be able to put yourself, and here's my rhetorician part, you have
Mhm.
to be able to put yourself into their shoes and their level and say, what was it at that point that I didn't know? How do I get there? A lot of my working in digital classroom spaces is saying, wow, that's a really cool thing. I've never tried that. What have you looked up? to help you with this? Like, what is your resource that you're sharing with me? Great, here's a resource I'll share back with you, and making that concept of crowdsourcing information.
Mhm.
Um, Instructors, teachers, professors of all levels will frequently have a hard time with that, because then they're not the expert. I'm like, yeah, man, that's okay. I don't need to be the expert on everything. I'm not going to be able to. I love to dabble and do lots of things. But why don't you become the expert in this thing and teach me? And, that's a model that I use in a lot of spaces. So I guess the highlights are clear communication, collaboratively, like what works for this class? And that means I have to have two or three options. And then if this class wants the Zoom chat and this class wants the LMS chat, I have to remember that. And then right. So having that collaboratively developed, and then that don't think you always have to be the expert on everything. You're the content expert. You don't have to always be the delivery expert in every tiny moment. And being comfortable with them teaching you as well. I don't,
No,
does
that's
that,
great. I think, and as you're talking, I know a lot of our listeners are in, maybe not necessarily what we would automatically see as teaching or
right,
educational environments, but when you talk about working on a team or
right,
being the leader of a team, I hear what I'm hearing you saying, I think is really great advice for all of us who are in maybe leadership positions or even team positions. This idea of a collaborative work environment is obviously something that in communication fields we've been doing for a really long time.
right,
So
right,
I think everything you've said feels like great advice about how to do that better, right?
right,
Coming at it from that educational perspective or that collaborative, I don't have to know everything,
right.
really does take the weight off of your shoulders, right? Yes. And I love that approach to leadership too, Elkie. I think that was really good advice.
Okay, we had to pause the podcast to let you in on this opportunity. If you're ready to elevate your brand storytelling, don't miss our training, Tell Better Stories, led by me, a seasoned television journalist and PR professor, and Kyle, an on-air meteorologist and video storytelling expert. This workshop unveils our secrets to craft compelling, personal-driven narratives that resonate with your audience. Learn our distinct approach that puts people first and brands second, leveraging 6 storytelling elements for maximum impact. Walk away with actionable strategies, tactics, and a clear process to replicate success in any organization. Check out the show notes to learn more about this offer, or reach out to homeplacecreative@gmail.com.
But I'm curious if we could dig a little deeper into what role do you see storytelling playing in some of those communication
Right.
techniques that you just told us about?
Right. And so a lot of, so going back to that clear expectation,
Mhm.
I'm a humorous person, and I and I'm a very dry humor person, and so that's why I think middle school and higher worked for me. I did work with elementary school kids for a hot minute, and any elementary school teacher is an angel that deserves way more than they're getting paid slash credit
Absolutely.
for.
Yeah.
I think that they're special people. The stories that we tell, often I'll say something like, why, I'm very metacognitive in especially in the writing classes that I teach, or the training, technical training,
Mhm.
teaching about grammar and voice, often for engineers or for people who are like, why do I care about this? Right. And so I'll say, right, why? Other than me torturing you because it's fun, what are the things? Why are we doing this? Right. So I do try to
Yeah.
tell a story of being
Yeah.
playful. So as
Mhm.
the instructor, as the trainer, because I do a lot of technical training in industry as well, having that, hey man, we're here to learn something, especially with adults, when I'm teaching adults and training adults and collaborating with adults. What you want to get out of this is totally up to you. I'm here to offer something for you. Your company has brought me in for this reason. I'm thinking specifically about a 8 hour. I came once a month for 8 hours a day to an industry,
Oh,
and
wow.
people from high school diploma all the way up to multiple engineering degrees in the same classroom, right?
Oh,
So how
wow.
needs of those people,
Yeah.
how do I reach that? So the story I tell is, we all have something to learn. I have something to learn from you. You can tell me about your industry. You can tell me about your process. And as a matter of fact, I incorporate that into what I'm teaching. You teach me about this. Great. Let's apply this in that way though, right? So like how to tie that together. So storytelling about me as a teacher, I'm fun. I'm here trying to help you learn. what are you as a student? What's the story you're telling yourself? Like, do you
Mm.
have to be here? Rah, 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 grumpiness, right? So you're probably not going to get as much, right? So very early on in my training, what's the goal that you have for yourself? You know, in academic classrooms, I'm like, you can't get an A because that's duh. You know, I don't let them do that. Like, what else is there to do? So it's a little bit about like what this class is for, what's the intention, what do you want? So really having that give and take. So
Mm-hmm.
telling a story, yes, there's a storyteller, but there's also the listeners and the reactions, right? And so
Yes.
like my favorite storytellers happen to be comedians. And
Right.
so like they are on a stage and they're telling a story. How do they know the story's going well? Well, they're getting laughter, right? And if they're getting nothing, they know it's bombing, right? So it's the same thing in a classroom or a teaching environment. You have to be sensitive to the reception. You can do a lot of things to build a good reception for yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a
Mm-hmm.
storyteller. So that story of I'm a teacher with a purpose, you're a student with a purpose. How can we come together to meet that purpose? I think if you're going to say, where does storytelling come in teaching and training? For me, it's that we're here for purpose. We have a reason to be here. It's not just to check off a requirement in your degree plan. It's not just because your boss said you have to come here. I want, and maybe that's why you start coming here, but I want by the end of this experience for you to have found something else. But also, I can't control you. So you have to make, and especially as adults, whether they're young adults or, and I mostly work with older adults now, that's your decision. And I'm not a bad teacher if you choose not to participate, but you know, we could make this better experience if you want to participate. Let's try, you know, so that planning, so the story of there is a purpose for us being here. Let's find that purpose together. I think that's a thread of storytelling that I find useful.
I love that because I don't think that I would have necessarily seen that how powerful that is from the get-go, sort of defining what that why is. But you mentioned something else that is a thread, I think, in storytelling that not a lot of us talk about. You talked about audience and you talked about listening, but you also talked about not being able to control the way a story is received. And I
Right.
think that for a lot of people, especially in leadership or as teachers, some of that it can be about control. I mean, it can be about, oh, you said this earlier too. Like, I have so much empathy. I want to save everyone. I want to bring everyone in. I want So how have you what advice would you give people to sort of let go of that control and to understand that you may have the best most wonderful course or the best most wonderful story, but it might there is the chance that it will be received by somebody in a way that you hadn't anticipated or planned for? Like, has that happened to you, I guess, would be the question. And if you're willing to share, but also what advice do you, I'm guessing that with all of your years of experience, what advice do you have for those of us who, are in those positions, whether that's leadership, teaching, education, you name it?
So what happens when you realize you're not in control of the reception is a lot of freedom for you as an instructor.
Yeah.
That's how
Yeah.
I've been following a lot of different thought leaders, and I don't have one specific name in mind, but there is no right or wrong choice. There is just a choice to be made. And
Hmm.
the choice that's made in the moment, you walk out whatever is happening from that choice. Now, does that mean you won't have hurt? Does that mean sometimes the choices are not the best? Absolutely not. But you've made a choice. There is no time machine as far as I'm aware. And so you just have to move forward with it.
Yeah.
And you can spend a lot of time going, oh, that class didn't go well. Nobody was prepared. It's not happening. Or you can say, oh man, that didn't achieve what I was going for. Let's kind of revisit at the beginning of class next time and say, are you overwhelmed because you have 5 million projects going on right now? So like there's an element of letting go of accomplishing, like we get agendas, right? And it's like we have to accomplish agenda, but this thing became super fruitful, but if we let it keep going, we're not going to get to this important thing. So sometimes as trainers, as planners, as leaders, we have to assess in the moment and say, you know, especially if you're in a working group that you know you're going to have contact time with later, you can say, you know what, just take a little pulse and say, I really enjoy what we're doing here. I'd like to keep following that. That means we're going to have to shelve another piece of our agenda. Is that okay? And
Mm-hmm.
like, again, it's that I think goes back to that collaborative
Yes.
communication. if
Mhm.
someone else came to the meeting with we have to talk about this today, and they're like, no, that makes me uncomfortable, you'd be like, okay, great, let's give 3 more minutes here and make sure we get to that, right? So there's
Mhm.
that collaborative piece, I think. I think I've lost exactly where we're headed, but I want to
No,
just,
that's great advice.
yeah,
Because again, this is theme, Elkie,
yeah,
collaborative belonging, spaces
right.
where we can trust each other.
And
Yeah,
they're
but
high risk.
yeah,
I will
yeah.
say, like, they're so letting go. So I'm giving this advice because I work in an environment where I'm able to. I've
Mhm.
also worked in environments where this was so risky it wasn't possible. And it was you have to be the best in the room or you're not going to be heard.
Mm,
I am thinking of some very specific instances that happened at a place I was. And I was told my voice was too loud, even though I was elected leadership in an organized
mhm,
manner.
mhm,
I shouldn't be saying the things I was saying. However, and that to me, that came down to a gender issue. Some men were saying the same things on the
mhm,
campus and not being told to be quiet, and I
mhm.
was saying the same things and I was being told to be quiet. And so there are situations where this is
Yeah.
risky,
I
right?
appreciate you saying that too. I think that's important to mention.
Yeah. And this is an ideal where, and again, I have made choices for myself because
Mhm,
I've had the ability to make these choices. And so I think it's thinking about more emerging teachers and trainers. There are spaces where you can seek out this safety for yourself, knowing that having a community behind you, and I have such a great community behind me, not just professionally, but personally, that encourages me to explore these things. That when I had this mad idea of resigning from my tenured, track job to go do something else, and then resigning completely from being a professor at all, um, to my credit and to my community's credit, nobody said that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Like they were like, yeah, that's great. You should do it because it's what serves you. There's a riskiness to this approach as well.
mhm,
Um, to not being the expert. And I think that as and mostly that risk comes to marginalized populations.
mhm,
Mostly that risk comes to the BIPOC populations that we work with and that work in spaces that aren't safe for them or friendly with them. Um, and so it's that balance of you're in this space, what can you achieve? But also, I think it goes back to that letting go. You
mm,
do not control everyone in the room. You
mhm,
can do your best to set it up, have clear expectations, have a welcome table when you greet people, have a clear path through what you're trying to do and clearly communicated agenda, and just know that sometimes it's just not going to work. Um, I think the thing that also brought me freedom, and again, it's the story we tell to ourselves, right?
mm.
I'm a
Yes.
good trainer. I'm a good teacher. And actually, I'm an amazing one. I'm an excellent one. I will blow
Love
you out
that.
of the water, and it's taken me years to get to that point to realize
Yeah.
there's skills
Yeah.
that I have that you and other people in my life are like, you're really good at that. I'm like, yeah, can't everybody do that? And you're like, no. So some self-awareness too, right?
Mhm,
Knowing where your strengths lie. And so I think what helped me step away from always having to be right and always having to be expert and always having to have a blow it off, blow the roof off, amazing fun time every time, is to say, you know what, we don't know what people in the room are going through. They may be
mm,
barely making it in here, right? And I think that it's that generosity, it's that making space for them as much as you would. Again, it's that giving them grace as much as you wish
mhm,
for grace for yourself. And again, I've listened to so many comedy podcasts, like listening to these people whose profession is to go up and make you laugh, right? Like sometimes they get told their friend died right before they go on stage, right? So
mm,
how do they go out there and make you laugh, right? And so it's the same. I think the story that we're telling ourselves as we engage in a teaching or a training environment, the main story is I have something of value to give. I hope they take it away. But it's I hope they choose to take it away, right? Not I hope I can force them to take it away. And so I think that that's been really helpful to me.
I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So this is something that I've been coming to, and I think it's a part of my coming out process as well, and
Cool.
how what you've shared has been
Mhm,
received.
mhm,
And again, I will connect that to my coming out process, being who I'm supposed to be and living my own truth wasn't always super well received by everyone in my life. But that didn't change who I was. That didn't change my truth and my lived experience. And so I think um, grasping onto that part of I have shared my best, I have given what I can. I can share this thing. I love this visualization of your one your best isn't like your 100% isn't the same every day, and it's like sometimes this is my 100% and sometimes it's up here and sometimes, right, because we're all people and we're all existing in this wild space we call humanity and the world. And I think again, it goes back to that community and that collaboration to say, I've given my 100%, whatever that is today. I hope they're giving their 100%. And if they can't, then maybe it'll come back to them another time. Or again, if you're thinking about long-term teams, teams that you're going to have connection with over and over again, or whether you're just like, hit and run workshop where you're probably never going to see them again, you just don't know. And so again, it's the story of I'm good at this and I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I hope they're receiving what they need, and connecting back to that idea of there is no right or wrong choice, there is just choice, and then walking forward from that choice. And yes, you can look back and learn, but you're again without that time machine, whether you're a TARDIS or the DeLorean or whatever time machine you're looking for, without that time machine, there's no reason to go back. There is the, after action report, like working with the firefighters, you definitely look at what happened
Yeah.
and make some new decisions moving forward. But the story you tell yourself is not, I am a horrible teacher, because let me tell you, eighth graders will burn you out in a heartbeat if you are like, oh, I'm a horrible teacher because they didn't get it the first time. But to go back, I went back to that city. I hadn't been there in probably 8 or 9 years. I was at a restaurant and our waitress happened to be a student that I had and she remembered me, right? So clearly, was she the best student I had in my class? Absolutely not. But, something I did connected with her enough that and I didn't look the same. I wasn't, my personality wasn't the same, you never know, so the story you tell yourself about yourself is really the only thing you can have any kind of control over. That reception and the story they're telling themselves, and again, like, how do we encourage people to understand that they are good students, that learning is a process? I mean, there's that whole
Mm-hmm.
student side of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are a good student if it takes you time. You are a good student if you need to study. You are a good student when you have questions. You are a good student
Yeah.
when you're interested. You are not a good student if it's automatic, and
Mhm.
and that person is a type of good student.
Right.
But having intellectual curiosity and wanting to understand more can in the long run create a different learning experience than just already knowing it, right? And so often, especially with academic feedback, students will have written, well, this class took more time than my major. I shouldn't have to spend so much time on this thing that's not my major. And I'm like, well, but if you knew it already, you wouldn't need it, and you do need it, and it is connected, we don't. And I
Mhm.
think as a teacher, I also try to think about what can I learn from these experiences, good, bad, otherwise. But then having the experience of having the exact same training, the exact same environment, having one person say it was the best they ever experienced, and another person say it was the worst they ever experienced, just kind of brought me to this space of releasing myself from
Mhm.
those are not the only indicators of success. And as a teacher, I know I'm doing what I can do. I hope they're doing what they can do. And if we can do that together, then maybe we'll bring some, successful, and what is successful learning? Is that them walking away knowing everything? Or is that them walking away saying, oh, that's a really cool thing. I've never thought about it that way. Let me learn more about it. And having that self-directed aspect kick in as well. So the story you tell yourself about yourself as a trainer, as a teacher, as an instructor can be more powerful. And how can, and I think co collaboratively with that, what's the story you can help students know about themselves. And again, working at inner city middle school, working at a rural high school, they are told, and at that rural high school, I was teaching students who had gotten kicked out of the main high school. And so here they are
Oh.
at this high school.
Mhm.
And like they would miss my class a lot together and they'd be excused. And finally they were like, yeah, miss, we're just at probation court together because we get arrested together a lot. And so they had just been told they're bad students. So why should they care? At the end of that year, they came to me and they're like, thank you for believing in us. Thank you for telling us we had something to give, and breaks my heart to be like, they're only in 10th grade and people are already telling them they're
Yeah.
not,
Yeah.
right? It's that, how do we impart value back to them
Mm-hmm.
at the same time? And so I think that's why teaching and training is so important, like creating a positive space, even on the days when you're like, ugh, well, okay, I'm doing it. I'm here. It's
Yeah,
happening.
you can't give 100% every day. Also, a really good piece of advice. You
Yeah.
came full circle. I love that because that was the very first question I asked you. You talked about, collaboratively identifying what that purpose was going to be. But the
Mhm.
other thing that you said, I think is really lovely, and I appreciate the reminder, is maintaining a curiosity, a sense of curiosity about yourself,
Mhm.
and your story, but also how you're interacting, like you said, collaboratively or not, anytime you're interacting with someone else in the
Mhm.
world, you can choose
Mhm.
how you want to interact and the stories you tell yourself. And I think it doesn't surprise me at all that you give the advice to remain curious as an
Mhm.
educator and just who you are as a person. And so I think that's a really nice way to transition.
Love what you're hearing on this podcast? Consider booking me to speak at your next event. Dive further into the transformative power of storytelling with my keynote. Tell better stories, speak up, stand out, and build community. In a world that often amplifies our differences, my talk invites you to embrace genuine connections. Break free from the echo chambers and discover the art of storytelling. Learn how to share your own narrative, listen actively, and foster communities that flourish on shared experiences. Check out the show notes to learn more about how to book a talk for your next event.
Into how you remain curious. So you also do a lot of other writing outside of, just the instructional design
Mhm.
work and the technical writing that you do professionally and the research, as you mentioned with the journal. But can you talk about some of the other fun projects that you've
Mhm.
done and how you maintain space in your life for that type of creative work as well?
Yeah. So I would also say a lot of my creation isn't necessarily, again, so multimodal creation,
Mhm.
always digital. So because I'm interested in color and space and shape and sound and the interaction of all of them, I love knitting and quilting.
Uh-huh.
I've done a lot of cross stitching at different points in my life because it's that connection and interaction um, with the design. And so I'm
Mhm.
not one who, I often just free form a lot of the projects that I work, especially knitting projects. Like
Mhm.
I'll learn a new stitch and just make something out of it.
That's cool.
Um,
I love that.
Sometimes I'll be like, "Ooh, that's not the vibe," and like undo it and do it again. And somebody will watch me and be like, "Didn't you just spend like 5 hours doing that?" And I was like, "Yeah, and it's horrible, so I'm gonna undo it again," right? And so I think there is the process writing teacher in me, uh,
Mhm.
because it's a recurse like because creating and making to me are connected to the trying, having the curiosity to try something new and try something different,
Mhm.
and to also be comfortable with saying, man, that just didn't turn out the best, let me give it another try, right? And
Mhm.
so I used to think that that was a mindset that so many people had, until I realized that especially people with anxiety don't. They're like, no, I have to get it right the first time. And so
Mhm.
watching a lot of my undergrad students come into my classroom with, tell me exactly how to do it right this one time, but you're actually learning building block skills, that if this curiosity, right? And so to
Mhm.
me, that feeds back into the creation stuff that I do, the
Yeah.
making and the creating. I have this idea for a cooking class where I'm still working on it, like where I want to take a dish and break down and be like, okay, so we're going to make enchiladas, and this week we're going to talk about tortillas, and this week we're going to talk about fillings, and this week we're going to talk about sauces, and this time we'll talk about like food allergies and things like that. And then at the end, you'll have your special way of making that. And I told that to another friend colleague. He's like, that's the most writing teacher way of making a cooking class I've ever heard.
It's so funny. I was just thinking the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
The
it's like, let's
process approach.
process
Yeah.
approach, right? And so I think that really plays into everything that I do. So I am in the process of doing many things. Since I have been working in an academic space where publishing was an aspect of what I was doing, a lot of commenting and grading on other people's writing. The journal that I work at, I'm a section editor, so I answer a lot of author queries and do a lot
Mhm.
of creative shaping. I
Mhm.
think it's really interesting how people think that authoring any project is a single
Oh,
single
single.
person effort, and I think
Mhm.
that's not real at
Mhm.
all in any way,
Yeah.
shape, or
Yeah.
editorial feedback. Anything you read in a printed book or a digital journal or anything that has a press behind it, the author has written the original idea, but the shaping of so much
Mm.
else. So a lot of my outside of my professional creation of content is feedback, and it's productive feedback. And I think again that's where that curiosity part comes from, and I want to try. So I just took this trip to Italy and had a fabulous time. And because I'm so interested in food, I don't call myself a foodie because I'm not just a consumer. I want to understand more, and I want to think about how location produces these things. Like one dish that we tried, the waitress was like, yeah, this is a dish that we've been making since the time of Marco Polo,
Wow.
which is a long time. We actually got to try that same dish in 3 different locations, and they were completely different in every location.
That's
Even though
awesome.
they're
So
all,
cool.
located near
Yeah.
Venice, um,
Mhm.
how they did it on this island was different than how they did it at this very fancy restaurant, was different than how they did it at this street food restaurant, right? It's the same dish, it's delivered in different ways. And I think like that's so awesome and important to acknowledge, as well as when you're creating and making. um I think one of the things that I learned along my academic way was there is still this high versus low, right?
Mm.
This has high value because it was created
Mhm.
in this very special place. And this is just common low value because anybody can make it, right?
Mhm.
And if we think about the storytelling tools we have at our fingertips, TikTok, and now all the AI development things, there's still that, well, this isn't valuable because it's mass created versus, right? I don't even know if Joseph Gordon-Levitt is still doing, um is it hit play, or he was like one of the first people who brought together this community of makers to say, um let's co-develop stuff together and reuse our things and like make
Wow.
actual meaning together, right? So the concept of Creative Commons is really
Mhm.
common into what I'm doing, is like, what's the open source free access way that I can share my knowledge? And I am an open access scholar for that reason. Um, but also balanced with artists should be, compensated for their work,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
if I'm
Mhm.
going to have a cooking class, how do I charge for that? What do I do with that? Because that's
Yeah.
not specialized knowledge, but I also want it to be available to people, right? And so
Yeah.
this come tip me whatever you want to as I cook. Um,
Mhm.
share a recipe with me in exchange, and that can be right. So having an exchange
Love that.
culture,
Yeah.
uh, I think all of that plays into what I do in the classroom and how I focus on training, because it's there's such a diverse there's so many diverse ways to approach something. I never want to just be stuck in the one way.
Mm.
And that's something that I reflected on as I was, stepping away from being primarily a writing instructor. I was able to look back and go, man, these teaching philosophies that I wrote when I first started teaching are vastly different than the teaching philosophies or strategies or structures that I use now. Um, it is very disappointing often to hear people say, well, students don't know how to do X when they come to my classroom. And then that's the end of the conversation. Students don't know how to write. Students don't know how to critically think. And then the response should be, so what are you doing to help that? No, 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 that's not my job to teach it. They needed to learn it somewhere else. I'm like, yeah, but they didn't.
Mm.
So does that mean
Here
you're
we
okay
are. Yeah.
continuing to fail in your classroom? Or is there a way you can create that bridge and create that support? And so that's part of how my wanting to work on this cookbook. And so the biggest project that I'm starting to work on is looking at how food has played a role throughout my entire life. And my life has not been easy, and no one's life has been easy, but there have been some very specific, significant traumas in my life that I am very happy to say that I've been able to overcome, and am proud of the growth and space that I've given myself. And so this book is going to kind of be a little bit of how did that happen, and also what did I learn along the way from the different communities I've built, from the different, I've had a privilege. This is my fifth state and second, I lived in 2 countries and 5 states, and I just got to go to my 14th country abroad, like
Yeah.
um, for a very poor socioeconomic child from the Midwest. So many of the things that I'm doing are wild, wild dreams that I never even had. I was just, survival was a dream as a child, living off of, government food and all that stuff. So food is such a huge part of my life, and again, the story of myself and the story of survival, and the story of not just survival, because I think I'm thriving, right? So the
Mhm,
privilege of moving from surviving into thriving and sharing that with other people, I think is so important. And I think that's what makes me a good teacher, is that instructor, professor, trainer, whatever, um, mentor. I think that if you ask me like what were my favorite roles and what are the things that I enjoy the most, it's getting to sit with someone and think through ideas and share feedback and collaboration, and then taking away and kind of going our own pace, and then coming back and saying, "Ooh, how'd that go?" Those collaborative communities are really where I think I've grown to value. And so the knitting and the cooking is my gift, right? So these are gifts that I like to give to the people who have given to me, right? I can't necessarily pay in kind or always share the same ideas or whatever, but I can make these small gifts or care, send messages of care. So these multimodal messages of thinking of you, so excited to see your success. Having those communities, I think, are way more important. The stories of, I could still reach out to firefighters a decade later and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a job. Are you guys still hiring, or do you have contract work?" Or, it's that community part. And that's like a very physically accessible, like money. But
mhm.
also way more important to me is that there's a literal network of people around the world that I can reach out to and be like, "Hey, I'm in this place, can I come see you?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, let's go." To me, we're here to engage in each other's stories and connect and develop community, intentionally and accidentally. And like I'm going to tell this story.
Yeah.
Favorite night we had in our 2-week trip to Italy was one that we could never have planned. So we're in Venice and we're on this walking tour, and very unusually for the area, there's a storm that comes in and the weather goes from close to 80 degrees down to 48 in an hour and a half. There's these high winds that, as a girl from the Midwest, I'm like, yeah, this is wind. But from there, they're like, wow, this is, the way their city is designed, things are falling off of these very high ledges. It's very dangerous. We end up, after a food walking tour, going just to have a snack, and not we'd eaten enough today. We didn't need a full dinner. We go to this little aperitivo space, which is like drinks and
Mhm.
snacks, sandwiches. We end up meeting a Swiss woman who, she showed us the big tile, like huge, like had just fallen next to her. And if she had gotten hit by it, she probably definitely would have had a concussion, maybe died. So she's there celebrating that she survived that. The bartender behind, she's a lot of fun and just very fun, that we've been there before. Her Italian friend comes in and he's like dressed really snazzy, and she's like, he's a DJ, and so she gives her the phone and like starts playing music. And there's this British woman sitting along the back wall, and she introduces herself to us, and she's British but lives in Riyadh and does art. And we're there right before this big opening of the art show, the Biennale. We meet a Irish fiction writer who's with his girlfriend in Colombia, but they're living in Berlin, and we just have this moment of happiness and joy, and we have drinks and snacks and just enjoy until she shuts the bar down like around 9:30, 10 because it's an early place. That moment was probably the most fun moment, spontaneous. I met these people, never going to see them again. We had a moment of happiness and joy together in a space that none of us intentionally created, but we created it by being there and being our genuine selves and just making a moment of joy together. And I feel like if you're going to think about what makes a good space, it's by bringing your best self to that space, asking other people to bring them their best selves, and emotionally, sometimes children can't do that. Sometimes adults can't do it. Like trying to create a space where the best space is there and then saying what happens happens. We're never going to be, even if we went back to that place with the same people, we would never have the same experience again, right? And like that's also part of it too, is that that's the idea of enjoying what we have and saying this is a treasure, this moment is a treasure, every moment is a treasure. You can't plan for it, but it's still amazing. Great, let's go, right? And I think bringing that into a classroom, into your planning for, because it is planning, any training or teaching is planning and taking time, and you have a story in mind, but you also have to have that flexibility of letting that story go if you need to. I don't know. It just to me is there's a lot of flexibility in saying I don't know, and I've said it a lot, and I know, I don't know, and I'm okay with that. And it's so much more freeing than saying I have to be the expert and I know everything. Everything has to pass through me. Psh, that gets exhausting.
Yes.
Way more
Oh
fun to
my
just be like,
gosh.
"Ooh, what's happening today? Let's go. So yeah.
What a beautiful story to share. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think that's a really wonderful way to sort of wrap us up today. Like I'm gonna let that one sink in and
Yeah.
sit for a little while today because what a beautiful reminder for all of us, Elkie, to about how to just live our lives in general. So thank you for that. If listeners want to hang out with you or get to know more about you, where can they learn about you, follow you?
Yeah, I am at Dr. Elkie. Elkie B is me on Instagram is
Okay,
my
cool.
main place.
So they wanna follow your stories or connect with you,
Yes, it's
that's the
yeah,
place
the
to go.
cooking stuff and let me double check and make sure. That's yeah, Elkie B is me.
I love
Um
it.
I do have a food space that's being developed, but that's I'm really gonna launch that more in the fall. So I'm
Yeah.
really doing a lot of background work with that. But my intention is to do some bi-monthly online cooking classes.
Oh, cool.
One is going to be like it looks fancy, but it's easy, and another one
I need
is
those.
this one will take a little more prep, and it'll be kind of a you can cook along with me. I'm just trying out a whole bunch of different strategies. I know there's so many online food people
Oh,
and
yeah.
also I just, lots of people in my space. I happen to have a huge digital network just because
Mhm.
of that I move around so
Yeah.
much,
Yeah.
and I don't mind just putting it out there for the fun of putting
Yeah.
it out there
Well, we
because it's
love that.
part of me.
I
Yeah.
love that. Okay, we do have rapid fire questions too.
Okay, yes. Oh,
Okay,
yes, I'm ready for
remember
this.
these? Oh,
Yes.
they're all the same now. Okay.
Yes.
Favorite story of all time? Movie,
Uh,
song, poem,
yes.
book, whatever.
Doctor Who, because I'm ready for this one
I know you are.
because all of space and time is possible, and they are still a very broken, flawed,
Hmm.
close to human alien who cares about humanity and is willing to sacrifice, but also their companions bring them back down to earth, literally, and say, you may have godlike powers, but you also should not exercise them. You should care about the people around you. And I just love that story. It's such a beautiful story. If you don't know Doctor Who, please get on it. But it's, 50 plus years of existing in a sci-fi space is a pretty huge accomplishment.
Mhm.
But I just think the heart, and he has two hearts, which is even better. The heart of that story is community and
Mhm.
the companions and the stories. And so I think that's part of why I'm drawn to it so much.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's not surprising at all. Very fitting, very
Yes,
fitting.
I feel like that's a
Uh, the second question, you probably know this one too. So you can share both or one or the other. What is the best piece of storytelling advice you've ever heard that you want to shout it from the rooftops, or the worst piece of storytelling advice you've heard that you just want to warn us about?
So I did my very first storytelling class was in undergrad because I was studying to be like a youth minister and a Christian ministry
Okay.
leader.
Okay.
So basically doing anything at a church except for preaching from the pulpit.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And that class was actually really cool. The craft of storytelling, that there is a practice element to storytelling, but you don't want to, so the advice is don't practice so much you lose the spark, right?
Yes.
So there is rehearsal, there is memorization. I know
Mhm.
some talks make you memorize it, but there should still also be that flexibility and that spark. So practice and have the pace and the connection in your mind, but don't lose the spark of you-ness or the humanity of it, kind of a thing.
Oh, that's great advice
That's
too.
um I don't know if I have any worst. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, I love that. Stay positive. No, some people are just like, this is bad.
No.
Okay, last question
Okay.
is how do you define storytelling in your own words?
Yeah, storytelling is seeking a moment of connection with the community you are engaging with
Mm.
by sharing a piece of yourself with them in that moment.
That's lovely. This is that I will confess that's my favorite question to ask in
It
the
is. It's a good
because
one.
it's so neat to see how people describe storytelling and in your in your interview especially it's just been that's popped up in every single question I've asked you. This theme of sharing that piece of yourself in an effort to build community. So, thank you.
Yeah. I will add the second best piece, and you can edit this however you want
Okay.
to.
Oh yeah, sure.
uh, is that as a leader and a trainer, it is okay to be opaque, right? So especially depending on who you're working with,
Mm,
the youth ministry professor that I'm still friends with, he said, think of it like a trash bag. You have stuff going on in your life, they have stuff going on in their life, but young kids especially don't need to hear all the sordid details of what's going on
mm,
in your life, right? And
yeah.
so go in, stretch that trash bag out and show them that you're also wrestling, but they don't need to know the important details. So I think leadership, especially, you can think about that there are some levels, and again, that's that high risk.
Yeah.
We talked about how risky it can be to be vulnerable.
Hmm.
This is the way that you can share some of that risk and say, oh man, I'm just dealing with something right now. I need to step back from this project for X days or one day, or
Hmm.
but also, you don't have to give everything away about yourself. So I think when you think about community, it doesn't have to mean full transparency in things that you just don't want to share, right? So me sharing that I'm queer is something I choose to share.
Hmm.
Not everybody needs to share that, right? Like that's up to them. So I think that opacity, that's a good also good piece of advice in the storytelling part.
Great piece of advice.
Sorry,
Thank you.
sorry, I put it out of order. You'll have to.
No, that was great. Thank you. That was a really good piece of advice. I'm glad that you thought of that to add it. So,
Hmm.
yeah, this
Hmm.
has been great. I'm so thankful that you're here and that
Of
you were here and you give
course.
us your time.
Yes, of course.
We're so glad you've listened to this podcast episode. If you liked it, would you mind doing us a favor? Share this episode with someone who would be interested in the topic too. We're on a mission to help everyone become a better storyteller. And don't forget to subscribe to the show to get updated every time we release a new episode. Each and every episode is produced, hosted, and edited by us, Meg and Kyle Adams at Home Place Creative. Happy storytelling!